Hello, everyone. On behalf of Thought Technology, I would like to welcome you all to this webinar on tips for structuring your EEG sessions. My name is John Bale. I'm one of Thought Technology's application specialists, and I'm going to be the instructor for today. So, why did we decide to make a webinar on this particular topic? Well, oftentimes, in terms of calls we get for troubleshooting in tech support, as well as the questions I get in the instruction that I provide, people are often wondering, how do I really sort of start up with neurofeedback? I understand the technical aspects. I mean, putting an electrode here, plugging a cable in there, initiating the program, but I'm just not sure how to bring it all together. This session is our attempt to assist anyone using our technology, as well as any neurofeedback user in general, on just what to be aware of and how you want to approach neurofeedback with a client. We're not going to be getting into any sort of clinical situations here, clinical answering of questions. It's really just focusing on these technical things that some people tend to forget or not realize is useful or necessary when it comes to neurofeedback. Now, and these are a few little things I just want to make sure that everyone is clear on when it comes to doing this type of therapy. Neurofeedback itself is operant conditioning used to alter brainwave activity. So this means that we provide reward through feedback whenever an individual assumes the correct mental state. More specific, it's whenever brainwaves assume a desired pattern, do we give a reward in terms of hearing a tone or having an animation play or move or hearing some type of music. Some type of positive reinforcement is given whenever the brainwaves assume the correct state that we want. Now, key about this is that for this type of conditioning, the client is ultimately doing most of the work. We, the clinician or technician, may be placing the electrodes on their head, running the software to make sure that it all runs correctly, but it's the client who's putting effort into doing this neurofeedback procedure. It's not a passive type of therapy. It requires the client to do that work, and that's why it can sometimes be difficult for a client, because no one wants to work. Everyone likes being lazy. Unfortunately, to get benefit, you have to put a little bit of effort. When it comes back to neurofeedback as well, it's important to remember that what we do here is we follow what research has shown in terms of associations between brainwave patterns and clinical conditions and behaviors. So for neurofeedback, we alter brainwaves that in turn lead to changes in behavior. For individuals who have problems with anxiety or problems relaxing, we're not training their ability to relax, we're not training their anxiety. We are training the brain waves, which in terms of research have been shown to cause changes in behavior that are desirable in working with these types of disorders or clinical conditions. Why does neurofeedback work? There's actually a lot of different theories or understandings and many different pieces of learning theory that contribute to this. In a really quick synopsis, I mean, neuroplasticity, hidden learning, long-term potentiation are three of these. There are many other reasons that or forms of learning that build up to why this works. As a quick synopsis, neuroplasticity is just your brain can rewire itself. You're not stuck, fixed like this. The brain changes over time and can be made better or made worse. Hebbian learning can pretty much be summarized as neurons that fire together, wire together. So again, if the brain can change itself, neurons can build up better connections, can weaken connections. And so again, it's the whole idea of the brain changing itself. For long-term potentiation, it's a concept that the more connection is active, the stronger it becomes. So again, it builds on this whole rewiring and changing itself. Ultimately, all this can be summarized is that the brain is plastic, it's moldable, and it can rewire itself to better perform tasks. Neurofeedback is us taking advantage of this ability for the brain to do those things. One last thing to always remember is that neurofeedback is not curing any conditions. We are training brain waves to cause associated changes in behavior. We're not curing someone's clinical condition. We're simply making their brain chemistry alter so they can produce a more desirable behavior. The underlying reasons why they may have been like that, perhaps it's genetic, perhaps it's from a physical injury, we're not necessarily changing those. We're just better adapting how the brain functions for the type of behavior that we want to see. All right, with that all out of the way, let's talk more about specific things when it comes to neurofeedback and stuff that you want to keep in mind. Before you actually even consider recording any type of data or looking at brainwave information, it's good to choose your starting point. How do you want to evaluate, how do you want to guide your clinical work? These are important questions, and a lot of people are not sure about this when they're first starting, and that's a very fair question. As one reference point, you can choose to look at evidence-based perspective in terms of published material, Or you can also look at people's clinical methods. There's a lot of clinical experts in this field who have written books exhaustively describing exactly how they do neurofeedback, and that's one great way of following a neurofeedback method. There's a lot of great published work that shows specific conditions and specific brainwave patterns associated with those conditions, and they give you the tools to evaluate and train those specific conditions. And so looking for these different published materials or clinical experts are excellent ways of starting to look at evaluating and guiding your clinical work. It's also very possible that you can have someone else to do evaluations for you. It's very normal in this field that one clinic will ask the client to go visit another clinician, have the full brain assessment done. That clinician sends the report back to the initial clinician, and it essentially tells them and guides them exactly what to do in terms of training. And so they don't need to worry about their ability to assess. They just do all the neurofeedback work according to someone else's guidelines. Of course, the second option is a bit limited. It depends where you're located, if there are other clinicians or resources nearby. But a lot of people do this, and it's perfectly okay. Getting someone who's more experienced with you to just guide you on exactly how you want to do the training with your specific clients. So as some simple starting points for where a beginner can go with neurofeedback, well, simple one-site EEG assessment is always a good idea. Start small, start easy. Don't try to do something that's overwhelming and too big for what your current experience is. In terms of Thought Technologies software platform, we already give you one simple one-site EEG assessment. It looks at eyes open, eyes closed, and two conditions when the individual is doing some type of task. And you get to compare the standard bandwidth frequencies and see what level of amplitudes they are for each different task. It's a very simple, good EEG assessment to start with. In terms of other resources, you can choose to follow some clinical expert methods because they, again, have described these in their books and literature, and they want people to follow them because they give them the guidelines according to how they do it. An easy example of this is Z-scores. So Dr. Robert Thatcher made the NeuroGuide Z-score database. You can purchase his database. You can compare the brainwaves of your client to his database, and his database essentially gives you exactly how you should be training according to that norm that he provided. Another example is Dr. Paul Swingle's clinical cue assessment. Very good for beginners. It does evaluations at 3 sites using minimal equipment, and it gives you a report. I'll be honest, I'm a little bit biased, but that's because I worked with Dr. Swingle. Another easy example is the Thompson's 1 Hz bins evaluation. Using a single sensor, you place the electrode at one site, and you're just evaluating the brain waves all across the frequency spectrum. These are good starting points, and again, you can check into those individuals for the literature to see if that maybe is useful for you in terms of simple starting evaluations for new clinicians to the neurofeedback field. Another very valid option is that you can look at the published research, and if that published research says that you train a specific frequency at a specific site in order to get a desired behavior, that's perfectly okay. It's published evidence-based research. It shows you what you should do and what we expect the outcome is to be, and that's very valid. An example of this is Monastra and Lubar's study on ADHD at CZ. They give you norms of exactly what ADHD was in that paper, and so they give you a reference point of how to train. These are all perfectly valid methods, and that's very much accessible out there in the field. One thing I want to remind people not to forget, and this is moving on a little bit, is that always perform an impedance check. So when you're actually going to do any type of neurofeedback session, whether it's an evaluation or for training, please perform the impedance check. It's how you verify that you've placed the electrodes well on top of someone's head and that you're getting a good, realistic signal from their brain representing real brain waves and not some sort of background static. Well, I've run into many clinicians who do not do impedance checks, and it's shooting yourself in the foot before you've even started, because if you do not know how realistic these signals are, the work you're doing just doesn't matter. As an extension of that, practice your electrode application method, because when you get good at applying the electrodes, you have a good impedance, and these two naturally work well together. I've already actually presented a webinar talking about how to apply electrodes in order to get a good impedance, and so on the Thought Technology website, you can look back at previous webinars, and that's already available up there for any of you to watch who need a little bit more assistance on how to apply these electrodes. I consider very much electrode application a bit of an art. It takes time to figure out exactly how you apply it to someone's head. I've instructed people, and straight off the first bat in 5 minutes, they can do it well, and so that's always surprising, but it's great that people can learn this very quickly. I know other people have spent many hours getting frustrated because they're not doing it well, and so just practicing this is really, really good. If you have family members who have no choice, if you have friends who owe you a favor, then please practice applying electrodes on them. And that's a really key point for those entering neurofeedback as well. Something not to forget also is that when you first start neurofeedback, a lot of people like to self-train because you want to understand how it feels on yourself before you want to apply it to someone else. And that's a perfectly valid and good perspective. Just know that sometimes self-training is really hard. Personally speaking, I am terrible at self-training. I'm what a more experienced individual might call a bit of a beta head or a control freak. So to place the electrodes on my own head and attempt to relax is very difficult if I'm trying to also look at the computer, make sure everything is going well while also relaxing. These two tasks are kind of mutually exclusive, so I have difficulty doing that, but just know that it is possible. It's sometimes hard. Some things that can be helpful that you should all keep in mind when you're getting started with neurofeedback is that teaching the individual to actually do some breathing or heart rate variability or relaxation before neurofeedback is really highly suggested. All the neurofeedback clinics that I've visited, they all do between 1 and 4 sessions of just sort of breathing HRV relaxation before the client ever even gets to doing neurofeedback training. The reason for that is that when a client sits still, if they're able to just do some normal relaxation, easy breathing, it'll render their task easier because they can better focus on what that is. And there's less of a chance of them getting frustrated because their body's already learned how to do a bit of relaxation. I strongly suggest at least breathing, but in terms of relaxation, some clinicians practice with temperature. If the person can get their hands warm, well, they're already good at relaxation. Other people use skin ducts as well. It's really up to you, but I'd suggest this is something that can really enhance neurofeedback if it's done beforehand, or even if it's done 5 minutes before the neurofeedback training session is about to begin. Something else to keep in mind is that when we talk about neurofeedback for a lot of the clients and talk about why they're seeing you, is that it might be useful to frame the client's situation from a perspective of performance enhancement. A parent bringing their child in because they have attention issues is okay, and they're willing to talk about that as problems, but discussing in terms of enhancing their ability, we're going to enhance your brain's ability to focus and relax and work correctly at school, is a much better perspective. For other more difficult clients who are perhaps adults and talking about themselves, no one wants to hear that their brain doesn't function in a way that helps them. People want to hear that, oh, I can improve the way you work so that you're better able to shut down and relax at the end of the day, that you're not getting worried or being anxious. We're going to teach you how to do this relaxation using neurofeedback, and it's going to let your mind just sort of quiet when it needs to at the correct times, but you'll be able to get right back up there and be active and very much aware when you need that as well. Again, it's framing the discussion that can really help with individuals considering neurofeedback as a treatment option for them. All right, one of the big questions we get when it comes to considering neurofeedback is, how do I structure a training session? And during many of my online training courses that I provide for people, this is one of the main things they want to focus on. So the way you would structure an individual training session, so when the client comes to you and what do they do that day? Well, first off, you already will have decided exactly what you're going to be training, so we're not going to talk about that. But how do we actually structure that training period? Well, they sit down, you have the electrodes on them, the computer's all ready to go. The first thing you want to do is probably pre-baseline. This is just a simple recording between 2 and 5 minutes. It depends on which clinical reference you discuss. And it's just to get an idea of where their brain is at that moment without them having trying to do any task yet. It acts as a reference point for what their brain is today, and it lets you know, as you perhaps compare this between sessions, how their brain is changing in terms of those brain waves over the 10, 20, 30 or more sessions you may be doing with them. Next, you would train, once the baseline's done, you would actually do whatever neurofeedback training task it is, and you do it in terms of a 3 to 5 minute trial. 3 minutes might be better for someone who's new at it, 5 minutes if someone's more experienced. And so you're only having them train or perform that task, try to get that operant conditioning feedback for 3 to 5 minutes. It seems short, but this is a nice good period where they're trying to do a task that is most likely difficult or unobvious to them. Once that first trial is done, you'd give them a quick little 1 or 2 minute break, and you'd ask them how it went or how you think it went for them. In fact, as a clinician or technician, you could let them know whether they did well or not because you're seeing the statistics appear. What you'd then do is you'd repeat this training and break period as many times as necessary according to the session length you have with them. So it really comes down to you just doing a short training period, a very small break, short training period, very small break, and this goes back and forth. Optionally, when you get to the end of the session and you're done with training, you can do a post-baseline, again, if you want to look at how the brain is now different, similar to the pre-baseline. The post-baseline is optional because you already did the pre-baseline, so do you really need the second one? Some clinical references say yes, and others do not care. It's really up to you and what they say in terms of opinion. For total training time, so how much neurofeedback would you do? Well, if you're starting with someone new, you'd maybe only do this training for about 15 minutes. And so that would be 15 minutes total, including the training and the break periods in between. For someone who's more experienced, who's seen you several times, you can start stretching out the time length of up to 40 minutes because that's reasonable to get longer and longer as they get better at the task or learn how to do it more properly. If ever you have a beginner who's getting a headache or they just feel uncomfortable, that'd be a good reason to stop. You don't need to push through that. It's just they're trying something new. Essentially, they're bringing their brain to the gym, so it's going to be sore. They're going to have a hard time doing a task. That's perfectly okay. This is how one can structure a basic neurofeedback session. We have a quick question coming in. What if the patient needs more time to get into the zone where 3 to 5 minutes isn't long enough? Well, if you find they need to get in the zone, they haven't quite gotten there, that's okay. You can give them a longer period of time. That's up to you. You'll be aware of it. Some clinicians I've run into actually like to replay a session of a previous period the client already had. It's the client gets to see what they've already done, and that might help remind them about what's going on or what they need to do in case they may have forgotten or having a harder time remembering that. Now, there's some steps that I always like to just list off in terms of how we set up a neurofeedback training screen with thought technology software. I'm going to list them here, and then I'm going to actually show you them in terms of software live. And so these are the normal potential steps we would need to do when we're first starting a training session with someone. And so we'd evidently load the desired display screens we're going to do with training. We'd set the frequency bandwidths. We have to know what we're training in order to train it. We would pick whatever types of feedback we're going to be playing for the client. We'd tell the system what type of whole session means we want to record. We would then tell the system to use an automatic threshold instead of a manual in order to set the correct training goal. We'd then describe the task to the client, exactly what we want them to do. And then finally, we'd start with the whole baseline training and doing that pausing, a break period in between. Let me get into more details and actually show you what I mean in terms of looking at the software live. So here, I'm looking at a display screen that I've already loaded up. This is just a standard DVD feedback screen. We can see that the first step is, well, load the screen. Good, we've gotten here. Next, we're going to want to set the bandwidth frequencies. So what exactly are we training with this individual? Well, I can see on the left, we have the 3 bandwidth frequencies already listed. By default in red, it's 1 to 4 hertz. In default green, it's 12 to 15 hertz. And in yellow, it's 43 to 59 hertz. For green, we're rewarding, so we're increasing that amplitude. And for red and yellow, we are decreasing those amplitudes. Let's say I wanted to change this feedback condition. So let's say I want to inhibit theta 3 to 7 hertz. Well, I right click on this little frequency and I'm going to tell it what I want to train. 3 to 7 hertz, apply close. And now it says 3 to 7. And I know the bar graph that represents that frequency is now going to be inhibiting 3 to 7 hertz. I want to leave my reward 12 to 15 hertz as it is. And I want to make my high inhibits, make sure it's high beta. So I'm going to set this 25 to 35 hertz. Easy as that. That's how we tell the system what frequency we want to train. Next, we choose what type of feedback we want. Well, I chose a screen for DVD, so I already know what feedback I want. I want to use the DVD or streaming instrument. In case any of you did not see the previous webinar I gave 2 weeks ago, it will be uploaded soon to ThoughtTech website, or it may already be there if you're watching a recording. But you can now stream YouTube videos or any online streaming content directly into the system. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pick my animation. Right click here, edit video selection. Ooh, actually I already chose it, Pixar short. I can choose any of the other videos if I wanted that, and so I'd choose that. If I wanted to change music, I would right click and I would choose an option for edit sound. If I wanted to change other types of feedback, I'd also do that right now. A cool thing I've seen with a lot of clinicians is that when your client is more used to doing this neurofeedback task, when you first bring them into the office and you have them sit down, you're probably asking them how their day went, how they've been feeling for last week, and you're placing lectures on your head. You can just tell them to go choose their choice of feedback animation or song themselves. They've probably seen you do it a few times on the computer screen, and so they themselves can go through these steps of choosing what feedback is available for you. That saves you the time of having to do it, and it gives them something to do while they're sitting there and you're applying the electrodes and paste and all that. Next thing, like I said, it would be choose the whole session mean. So some statistics we want to have appear whenever we're done recording. To do that, I'm going to go to Options menu and then choose Set Open Display Statistics. In this little window that pops up, choose the second option where it says show only channels marked as statistics, and then choose the statistics that are appropriate to you. For me, I know I want to choose the means. So let's say I already chose theta, 3 to 7 hertz. I left SMR, 12 to 15 hertz there, and I chose this higher beta. Let's just see what all the betas look like then. Oops, and selected that accidentally. Yeah, let's go with all the betas. All right, so we're going to be looking at those statistics when we're done with training. Next, I'm going to tell the system that I want it to have some automatic thresholds turned on. So I didn't describe exactly what this meant, but let's see what it is. These 3 vertical bar graphs represent the 3 frequencies of training. So this one's going to represent 3 to 7 hertz. The central one will represent the green, 12 to 15 hertz. And the one on the right will represent the yellow, 25 to 35 hertz. If I right click, I can see this threshold mode, and currently it says automatic. This means that when I start recording, the software is going to move the thresholds such that the person is training for about an 80% success rate. What this means is that we're having the software set the appropriate training threshold for us so that we don't have to do the work. It'll be examining the specific brainwave frequency amplitudes of the client, and it'll set the threshold to that 80% as a default because that's a good starting mark for someone trying to do neurofeedback training. Once the automatic thresholds have been set, I'm then going to actually right click and then turn off the thresholds to set it back to manual so the thresholds no longer move automatically, and so the thresholds become fixed training goals. We're trying to have their brainwave amplitudes be higher or lower than that threshold, and we'll be able to see with time if they're getting better or getting worse at that fixed task. Next thing would be to describe the task to the clients, and in one slide I'm going to give a lot more information. But at this stage you tell the client, okay, I want you to look at this animation, or I want you to look at these bar graphs, and I want you to do this sort of task or think about this type of thing in order to get success achieved. Again, I'll describe more in detail about that a little bit later. And then when you're ready to go, you'd hit play. I'm going to hit play right now just because I want you to see what these automatic thresholds look like. Currently, you see those 3 vertical bar graphs, and these signals are just jumping up and down according to the individual's brain. Once 30 seconds has passed, you're going to notice some numbers are going to appear above these vertical bar graphs, and that's the automatic threshold kicking in. And that's going to be letting us know what the current percentage of success is, and then it'll also be letting you know what the current threshold value is set to. All right, there we go. 30 seconds has passed, and so we can see that there's 3 percentages, with each a number below it. Notice how every few seconds, the number below the percentage changes. This is the automatic threshold slowly being moved to be an appropriate level such that we're going to get an 80% success rate. For this red bar graph and this yellow bar graph, I can see that 80% success is about achieved already. So for red and yellow, the amplitude's below the threshold about 80% of the time. For this middle one, this threshold keeps moving until we get around 80%, and then I know that this is a good starting point for the training. At this stage, I'll right click. I'm going to change the threshold to manual, and I'll do that for each of the 3 bar graphs. Makes it a little bit easier so we can see the streaming instrument even. Now you might want to manually move these as well in case the person's having a hard time getting some good feedback, and that could be a good starting point as well if someone's really new and you want to help them along. For those of you who might be wondering, when I said we structure a session where we do a baseline first and then we do training, this right now could be the baseline. The one difference would be that the individual is not going to be looking at the computer screen because we're giving them 0 feedback in this baseline. You turn the computer away or have them look away from the computer, and the baseline would just be us recording for a period of time to get an idea where their brainwaves are at. Once the baseline's done, we can then have them now look at the computer screen and they can actively try to get this feedback to occur, whether it's visuals or sound or something like that. When we're done with the training period or we're done with the baseline, we can either pause the session and then we can take a break, or alternatively we can stop the session. If we were to stop the session, you see these stats pop up, and this will give us an idea of how well this person did in terms of their brainwaves for this immediate baseline or training period. If we wanted to, we could then immediately just reload the session and hit play once more, and we'd be able to go right back to training. So that's a definite easy way of doing this. Okay, one thing I do want you to keep in mind is that I listed off these as the general steps you have to follow in preparation for running a neurofeedback session. Just know that some of these steps are optional because it really depends on exactly what style of session you are running and how you like to do it. Perhaps you're choosing a display screen that already has frequency bandwidths that are fixed. You don't want to alter that. That's fine, you can skip it. Maybe you never like to use automatic thresholds because you like to be in control and you want to set the thresholds yourself. That's also perfectly okay. So you don't have to do the automatic threshold. It's really up to you how you do it, but this is just a general guideline of steps I have people go through in order to set up a screen. Of course, the steps are not listed here, like perform an impedance check. Evidently, you would have to do that too, but that's not so much setting up the screen. In terms of tracking clients' data and progress, it can be done really, really easy as long as you do a little bit of preparation. Right, here's a quick example of what sort of values you might be writing down. I've seen clinics where they have this as a printed out piece of paper that you fill in as the training occurs. I've seen other clinics where they have this as an Excel report and they paste the numbers into there as the training occurs. Others like to do all the training and then like to review the sessions for the statistics and then get those numbers afterwards. It's all up to you. My personal favorite is actually just having a piece of paper where I already have this information written down. So what is this information more specifically? Well, this piece of paper could be strictly for this single client, and you'd keep adding additional pages to this piece of paper depending on how often they see you. At the top of the paper, we can have exactly what site we're training to remind us and the measurements of their head. And so the first time you see the individual, you would already measure out their head to make sure you have the exact location for whatever electrode site you want. And you might as well keep these numbers written down so you don't have to remeasure it another time. So it's a nice fast reminder when reapplying those electrodes. We then have in this list is you have exactly what bandwidth frequencies you want to train and in what direction. So in this theoretical example, we're training theta to inhibit, SMR to reward, and beta inhibit. And then you have a list of session 1, the baseline and how many trials you ran, and session 2, the baseline and how many trials you ran. And you'd be able to show each small period what their brainwave amplitudes were like. And you'd be tracking that change across a single session, and you'd be able to track that between sessions as well. This is a good way of getting an idea if the person's getting better or worse at the task as they're sitting there in front of you for one session, and also lets you rapidly look between sessions and see, ooh, their baselines are changing every time they come in, so there's clearly a change going on in terms of the brainwaves. I'm getting a question here. Can you please speak to if these screens give a points earned for clients so they know how many goals they've gotten? Some of the neurofeedback screens actually do have points that show how well they're doing. The points get scored up according to how long the neurofeedback condition is attained. So in this example we went with, it'd be having SMR amplitude high and having theta and beta low. For someone who gets fewer points, it means they're having a harder time holding the task. For someone who's getting more points, it means they're having an easier time getting the task. The amount of points they get is very much relative to their thresholds. And so if they get fewer points in one session and more points in another session, while the thresholds remain the same, that itself is also another good metric or way of knowing whether someone's improving or not in terms of whatever those feedback conditions are. Going back to this example of a form, there's also other potential values you can include in this. You can have threshold values as suggested by the previous question, so you know exactly what threshold value you're training for today, and as session progresses you can see if the threshold is moving up and moving down to indicate they're getting better or worse at the task. You can also evidently write the date and time of day, because when clients come in, if it's perhaps the morning when they're more awake, they might have an easier time doing the task. If it's the afternoon after a long work day, they might have a harder time doing the task because they're tired, they're human. It's normal not to have as much energy or be able to put as much effort into the task. These are all normal things. Having this type of form, whether on a computer or as a printout piece of paper, is really useful for the technician or the clinician as you're running the session, because you're quickly keeping track of stats and it's just available there as a reference point for later. It also lets you, like I said before, it lets you know if the client's doing better within the session and if they're seeing improvement across different sessions and things like that. Some questions we have coming in about these sessions. One would be, do you set your thresholds before your pre-baseline data? You can set the thresholds before the pre-baseline or during the baseline. Just know that they're not yet trying, whatever trying means for the threshold for that condition. So they may do suddenly quite well when they go to the active training. Alternatively, you can set the thresholds during that first training step. It's really up to you. If you're setting the thresholds during the baseline, they're not looking at the computer, and so we're just having the thresholds move closer to where their brain is at for that day, but they might need some adjustment as you move along across the different training trials. Someone else's question is, how can you get a baseline? It all depends on the clinical case. Exactly, it depends on the clinical case, and so you set the baseline according to where they are at that moment, and you'd have to train in relation to that. It's very much a personalized type of therapy, neurofeedback. Someone's asking, what if the patient gets worse? What should be done? Well, you might want to change how you're describing the task and how we're looking at it. Again, I have not gotten to describing the task yet or how you talk about it with the client, but you may want to try different options. If it turns out the person's consistently doing the very opposite of what they should be doing, that itself shows consistency. They're attempting to do the neurofeedback task and they're just doing it the wrong way all the time. So they have an ability to do it, it's just they haven't quite figured out what is considered good or what is considered bad. If you feel that someone is putting efforts in the incorrect direction, have them try doing the opposite, because that might yield to results. There is a reality that some people, it might just not work for them in the neurofeedback, and we'll also be able to see those in the stats where you're just going to simply see no progress at all. Someone's asking, are there any predefined screens or do we have to build them all on our own? When it comes to thought technology software, you do not have to build screens yourself. There's many, many predefined ones. The one I just showed is one of the default predefined ones as well. So there's many different screens set up for different bandwidth frequencies with correct feedback already allocated and lined up for you. So there's no need to design your own. Some clinicians, or many clinicians, actually like to design their own software, and that's great. I like the idea of doing that, but I'm comfortable with computers, and I like to modify things to be more specific. All right. How do you describe the neurofeedback task to a client? This is a very, very popular question, and this is possibly some of the harder things to do, because no one's very sure how to initially describe a task to someone, especially a task that's so unclear and difficult in itself. I actually have 3 examples of how people can describe these tasks, coming from different interesting voices and different perspectives on this. Just know that how you describe the neurofeedback task to a client depends on what they're going to be training. If you are training someone to increase SMR amplitude, you do not describe it in the same way as you describe someone trying to decrease beta. They're 2 different states. If there's also a lot of different statistics going on, we're going to talk about it differently than if we're just training one specific simple statistic. There you go, I already said these points. So depending on the conditions, you might want to talk about the feedback in a different way. And when we actually give these descriptions, we can be more literal or descriptive, exactly what's going on, or we can be more figurative, try to build an image about it. It just depends on what you're doing with the client. And to be fair, different clients react in different ways. So some people prefer a description that might be more literal, and others might react better to a more figurative description or one that's more image-based. Here's the first example. I did work with Dr. Barry Sturman. He is one of the founding fathers of the neurofeedback field, and I asked him how he describes the neurofeedback task to his clients. And so he likes to use more of a simple and general description in order to talk about a certain task. The way he gave me an example would be, just be relaxed with your eyes open, taking in the screen image. Don't try to adopt a strategy to outsmart the computer, because the program is going to guide you. And so all you need to do is hold on to the state or the feeling when you hear the feedback sound ring, or when you hear the feedback music play, or when you see the animation growing or moving or something like that. He doesn't like going into very big details because he finds it gets too complicated. One of the things he likes to point out to the clients is that don't try to build a strategy to beat the computer, because the computer will always win. Just try to hold on to that state or that feeling or that condition when you're getting that good positive reinforcement, that good positive feedback, whatever that feedback is. Another example of how to describe this would be from Brendan Parsons. He's a colleague and friend of mine. He's actually a trainer in my part of Canada as well as France. And he likes to give a much more specific description of what's going to go on to his clients, because he finds that can be helpful with them. So for him, he might say the description like this. So on this screen, you're going to see bar graphs on the left-hand side, and each of one of them represents a different type of brainwave. The one in the center represents your brain working properly. And so this is the one we want to encourage. So we want this one to go up. The other 2 represent your brain when it's working inefficiently. One is when your brain isn't working hard enough, and the other is when your brain is working too hard. In this specific example, we're talking about theta and high beta. On the right-hand side, we can see there's a video, and you're also going to hear music through your headphones when this video is playing. When your brain's doing the right thing, so when it's working efficiently and not too hard and not being too lazy, the video is going to grow bigger and the music is going to play louder. When it isn't working like that, it means that your brain is not working exactly how we hope, and so the video is going to be smaller and the music's going to stop. I know this can be frustrating because this is important. It's how your brain knows when it's doing the right thing over the wrong thing. Over time, your brains are going to learn to understand exactly what it's trying to do, and this is going to help you with this training session or with this training goal for whatever they're seeing you for. I, the therapist or clinician or technician, am here to help you figure out how to make this video and music play as much as possible, but I'm never going to completely control it. So it's normal for this feedback video to cut out or become small, or for this music to cut out or get softer or not heard as loud. That doesn't mean you're not doing it well or you're not working hard enough. It's just normal because your brain can never perfectly do the task. It sort of does it well sometimes and does it not so well some other times. If it never stopped, or if the feedback never stopped, your brain wouldn't understand exactly what it's trying to do. And so I'm going to make it so that the video or music or whatever the feedback is only going to cut out a bit. And so that way it's going to help you with this learning task, exactly what you're trying to do. That's his much more lengthy description of this task and being more literal according to the instruments that are on the screen. When it comes to describing the feedback task, you can go and describe the feedback animations for one trial. And in this learning process, when they're still not sure what to do, you can try for the next trial, have them focus on the feedback vertical bar graphs, because some people like to focus on that. For another training trial, you can have them focus on maybe the feedback music, if there's music playing. Different people react to different sort of positive reinforcement, and some prefer one over another. It's depending on what type of individual they are. So try different things, especially when starting off with someone. As another example, this is a nice quote that really gets more to the figurative or imagery perspective. And this is provided from Peter Van Dusen. So he's a trainer formerly from the US, but he lives and provides treatment now in Brazil. His description right here is more appropriate for describing how we're trying to increase alpha bandwidth amplitude with someone. So you're in a river of thoughts, and currents are just pulling you in various directions. You can find a small island just big enough to stand on in your mind. Pull yourself onto that island. Now, in the middle of this river of thoughts, I want you just to look out, and you're no longer subject to these currents that are sort of pulling you in every single direction. You can look at the currents and you can see the waves as they're moving in different directions, but again, you're free from them and they're not pulling you in any particular way. All that energy that you were just spending standing in one place, floating there as the current was pulling you, is now freed up so you can do something else with that. You're sitting still, you're calm, you're resting, but you're fully aware of what's going on around you in terms of all these currents off your island. This is good alpha state. So that's again sort of imagery inducing. It's not very specific, and that's what he gives an example when trying to describe someone who wants to increase alpha amplitude. So these are three different clinical individuals talking about their experiences, how they discuss these type of different frequency amplitude and things like that. Consider them as options how you might want to talk about the training task with your clients according to what exactly you're supposed to be doing. All right, this has actually gone much quicker than I thought it would. We haven't had as many questions as hoping, so I'm hoping people are rapidly writing down notes, very much enjoying this presentation. But that ideally was the full length of this simple webinar for those getting started with neurofeedback and wanting to have these simple foundations and basics of how to structure a neurofeedback session. Just to let you all know who are attending this webinar or listening to this recording, the Thought Technology does offer quite a few different types of online courses or on-site training. I am myself in one of the instructors for Thought Technology if you ever want to learn how to technically use the equipment for neurofeedback. You can also look for us at many other workshops and conferences where we like to show up in person. We're happy to answer questions and go over stuff with you. I also like to let you know there's a lot of great online resources that go both into the technical and clinical work. AAPB, BCIA, BFE, as well as ISNR are all really good resources if you want to learn more clinical information. Someone did ask, are there BCIA courses when it comes to neurofeedback? And yes, there definitely are. A lot of people offer BCIA courses in different languages according to what region of the world you're in. So if you're looking for a full, I believe it's 30 to 40 hour training program for BCIA neurofeedback, please inquire from your local dealers or clinicians because a lot of people offer that in many different languages. Someone's question is that many clients complain that they're not able to control the condition by themselves and they're waiting for the trainer to guide them. How do we guide them? We guide them with these descriptions of letting them what they want to do. Part of the work has to be done by them naturally. They have to get this internal click, this internal feeling or occurrence of what exactly is supposed to be going on. It's naturally difficult for people to do because it's so unclear and so different from a normal type of thought process. But have them focus on an animation, trying to get the animation to run or the picture to grow. Have them trying to focus on the music, trying to get the music to heard loud or for the music to turn on. Have them also try focusing on the bar graphs. So you want a certain bar graph to go up, the two to go down. And let them know that this is difficult and they're just trying to hold on to that feeling. Some people, if they're attempting to do relaxation, they might try too hard, and that's the exact opposite of it. And so again, you're trying to assist them by describing these feelings as well, in case, if it can be described as a feeling. Sometimes training itself can be very difficult, so you have to stay much more vague with descriptions. So you have to try a few different things, and it really depends on what you are doing clinically with the individual and how you might want to include further descriptions from that. Someone is asking about percent of success when it comes to the training thresholds. I sort of glanced over that because it's something that I talk about normally in more technical classes. You'll notice that if I speed up this recording, the percentages of success appear above these bar graphs. And by default, the software with an automatic threshold is trying to set it at 80% success because that's considered good. Oops, I pressed the wrong button. Clinical research shows that a success of 70 to 80% yields the highest chance of the individual learning to do neurofeedback. And so it gives the training task or puts it in their favor in a nice, good way. If you wanted to make a 60% success rate for that threshold, such that that's the starting point, it'll be harder for the individual, but it means that they'll be having to put more effort. If you want to lower the threshold down to 60%, it just means that the individual themselves should be a bit more experienced with neurofeedback before they go to that level of difficulty. And if you think it works well for them, then excellent, they're up for the challenge. It just, for novice trainees, it might be a little too difficult to start with. Someone's asking, how do we evaluate, see if a therapist is doing a good job? Well, if you see the client is doing well in terms of progress within or across sessions, that's a way you'll know if the therapist is doing well. Like I said, for beginners in this field, it's really difficult to know how well you're doing, so try training on yourself or on family members who don't have a choice, and that's a really good starting point. Also, friends being willing to try this helps. It'll give you a better perspective on exactly how to describe it or how to think about the training task, and that'll give you a bit more of a system before you're trying on an actual client. Someone's asking, is it helpful to use neurofeedback with psychotherapy? Neurofeedback itself is just a tool. You can add it to the toolbox of what clinicians can already provide. I would suggest combining with psychotherapy where the cases are adequate. Again, that's up to your own clinical choices, but combining neurofeedback with other modalities and other treatment therapies, I think, is always good. Doing one therapy is limiting, doing many therapies is always better. If you have any other questions that pop into your mind, whether it's 5 minutes from now or a few days from now, or if you're in fact watching this webinar as recording on the Thought Technology website, again, feel free to send me an email. I'll be happy to answer those. All right. Thank you very much again, everyone, for attending this webinar. Thank you very much for your questions. There were many, many, many of them, and I'm happy when people have to ask questions. Again, for those of you who are just starting out with neurofeedback and you're beginners, it may seem daunting because there's a lot to learn, but it's all about taking these small steps, and keep in mind what I gave as advice today. These are little things that will vastly help your initial progress into the neurofeedback field, and I think you'll get a lot of benefit from being able to take these within context. All right. Thank you very much, everyone, once more, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.